Okay, so through all the previous lectures, we've seen all the weaknesses that can be used by hackers in order to compromise WIP, WPA, and WPA2 encrypted networks. We've seen how they can use these weaknesses to crack the password and get the actual key to the network. We also seen that attackers are able to de-authenticate or disconnect any device from any network without the need to know the key to that network. And in the previous lecture, we've seen how we can modify the settings of our routers so that we can increase the encryption of our network, increase the security of our networks so that hackers can't use the attacks and get the password. Now, in order to apply the settings that we talked about in the previous lecture, you need to be able to access the settings page for your router. Now, each router has a web page where you can modify the settings for the router, and it's usually at the IP of that router. So first of all, I'm gonna check and get the IP of my computer or of my device, and I'm just gonna do ifconfig lan 0. And as you can see, this is the IP of my computer. So I'm gonna open my browser, and I'm gonna navigate to 192.168.0, and the IP of my computer was 25. Usually the IP of the router is the first IP in the subnet, so this is the subnet. At the moment it's 192.168.0, and I'm just going to add number 1 because that's the first IP in the subnet, and that will take me to the router settings page. And as you can see, it's asking me to enter a username and a password. Now, routers come in with a pre-specified username and password. You can check what's the default username and password, and then I highly recommend you change them after that. So usually it's written in the manual. So check the manual, see what's the default username and password, and then you can log in. Now, in some cases, the attacker might be doing a de-authentication attack against you, so he might be preventing you from connecting to your network wirelessly. So what you can do is you can connect to your router using a cable, using an Ethernet cable, and when you do that, then the attacker cannot use a de-authentication attack to de-authenticate you or disconnect you. So you'll be able to access your router settings using the wire, and then you can modify your security settings and change the encryption, change the password, do all the things that I recommended in the previous lecture in order to increase the security so that the attacker will not be able to attack your network and get the key. Now, the settings of each router are different. They depend on the manufacturer and even the model of the router. But usually the settings, the way that you change the settings is the same. And like 90% of the cases, the router is always at the first IP of the subnet. So all you have to do is you get your IP using ifconfig command like we did here when we got it, and it was 192.168.0.25. That's the IP of my device. And then I changed the last 25 to number 1 to the first IP, and that is the IP of my router. Now, I'm going to navigate to the wireless settings. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of settings that you can change for your network, and we're concerned with the wireless settings at the moment. So, as you can see, my wireless is enabled. You can change the name of the network, you can change the channel, and the bandwidth and all that. So I'm going to go to the security, and as you can see now, I'm using WPA encryption with WPA or WPA2 authentication, and the encryption using AES and TKIP. And if I go on WPS, you can see that the WPS is disabled, as we said now. So basically, I'm not using web, so they cannot use any of the attacks that we spoke about that allow you to crack WEP encryption. I'm using WPA, which is much more secure, and I disabled WPS, so they cannot use Reaver to determine my WPS pin and then reverse engineer my password. The only way that the hacker can access or get my password is by obtaining the handshake first and then use a word list to find my password. Now, my password is very random, even though it actually doesn't use numbers or digits, just letters, but it's very random, so there is a really small chance of someone being able to guess that password. Now, there is another thing that I'd like to show you here is the access control. And using this, you can add policies. So you can add an allow policy or a deny policy. And using that is based on the MAC address. You can specify MAC addresses that you want to allow to connect to your network. You can also specify MAC addresses that you can deny from your network. So for example, you can just, if you don't have many people, many visitors coming to the house, or if you're in a company with a specified number of computers and you want to only to allow a number of computers to connect to that network, then you can just ask the people, get their MAC addresses, the people that you want to allow, and add them in an allow list. Now, even if someone has the actual key, the right key for your network, and they don't exist in the whitelist or in the allow list, they will not be able to access the network. You can also add a deny list, which is if you want to deny a certain computer or a certain person that you think are suspicious, you can just add their MAC address in the deny list and they will not be able to connect to your network. So this is about it. As I said, the settings page usually look different. The names might be called different names, as in the names for each of these tabs. But usually the main thing is you should be able to access the router settings using the subnet IP and add the number 1, which is the first IP at the end. And if you're being attacked, if you can't connect to your network at all, then just use a cable and modify the settings like we discussed in the previous lectures.